Good evening, friends, and welcome back to our series on the first age of Middle-earth. Tonight, we're going to tell a story of light. But it is not the light of the sun or the moon, but an older, more sacred radiance. We will witness together, after the light of the old world was extinguished, how the gods, in a blessed land surrounded by high mountains, sang into existence a pair of holy trees that could breathe and flow with brilliant light. One dripped with a silver glow, while the other scattered a warm, golden rain. We will see how this perfect paradise, built to ward off evil, unintentionally split the world in two. Outside the paradise, in the forsaken, starlit, dark continent, the first pair of elven eyes quietly opened. The first beauty they saw was the myriad of stars in the velvet night sky, and the first fear they experienced was a nameless hunter lurking in the shadows. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, please let me know in the comments what city you're in and what time it is there, so I know which corner of the world my voice is keeping company with. Now, dim the lights, and let's enter tonight's story with the sound of the bell. After the end of the spring of Arda, the world fell into a vast and profound twilight. The two great lamps that had brought endless light to the world, the silver lamp Illuminated in the north and the golden lamp Ormal in the south, had been utterly destroyed by the power of Melkor. Their fall was not just a physical catastrophe, but a collapse of the cosmic order. When the lamps fell, the earth was broken and the seas roared in fury. The first home of the Valar in Arda, the Isle of Almaren in the center of the world, was also leveled in this cataclysm. The glory of an age, along with the Valar's initial creations and painstaking efforts, was thus reduced to nothing in the violent chaos unleashed by Melkor. Faced with this scene of devastation, the hearts of the Valar were filled with sorrow. But they did not despair. They made a far-reaching decision: to abandon the vast continent of Middle-earth and retreat to the westernmost end of the world. They crossed the great sea of Belagare and arrived on a continent later known as Aman, meaning the Blessed Realm. This was not a cowardly escape, but a strategic retreat. They realized that to create and protect beautiful, exquisite, and untainted things, they must build an impregnable barrier to completely shut out Melkor's dark and corrupting power. Thus, on the eastern coastline of Aman, the Valar exercised their world-shaping power to undertake a project of immense scale. The earth rumbled at their will, and a mountain range of unimaginable grandeur rose up, as if it were the very spine of Arda. These were the Pelori, meaning the fencing or defensive heights. Like a giant shield, it guarded the coast of Aman from north to south, its precipitousness and lofty peaks surpassing any other mountain range in the world of Arda. The peaks were sheer as if cut by a knife, soaring into the clouds, their surfaces smooth and unclimbable by mortals, effectively separating the interior of Aman from the outer world, as recorded in the Silmarillion of this great deed. Therefore they fortified their dwelling place, and upon the shores of the sea they raised the Pelori, the mountains of Aman, highest upon earth. This mountain range was not merely a geographical barrier, but a declaration of will. It symbolized the Valar's determination to protect a land of purity, but it also unintentionally caused the separation of two worlds. Within the mountains lay order, light, and blessing. Outside lay the abandoned darkness and the unknown, where Melkor could wreak havoc. Among the many peaks of the Pelori, one was the most majestic and magnificent. Its summit was perpetually covered in white snow, shining under the starlight and reflecting the light of the two trees like an eternal beacon. This was Taniqatil, meaning high white peak, also known as the Ever-White Mountain and Illarina, which is the star-crowned. It was the highest peak in all of Arda. At its very summit, Manwe Sulimo, king of the Valar, and Varda Elentari, queen of the stars, established their thrones. Their halls were named Ilmarin, meaning mansion of the high airs. From there, Manwe's gaze could pierce the clouds and overlook all of Arda, and his mind could feel the breath and pulse of all things in the world. And Varda, when she sat beside Manwe, could hear calls from the furthest east. No voice, whether in light or darkness, could escape her hearing. Taniqatil thus became a symbol of Vala authority and divine guardianship, the axis connecting heaven and earth. Within this magnificent defensive mountain range, the Valar began to establish their second and more splendid kingdom, Valinor, its name meaning the land of the Valar, later also called the Blessed Realm. They gathered there all the beautiful things that had survived the destruction of the Isle of Almarin, be it the seeds of plants, the bloodlines of animals, or shining gems and pure waters. Not only that, but they also created many new and more beautiful things upon this foundation. The Silmarillion describes the birth of this land as follows. In that land the Valar gathered great store of light, and all the fairest things that were saved from the ruin. And they made there things new and fairer still, so that Valinor became more beautiful than Middle-earth in the spring. In the air of Valinor there was no disease, plants did not wither, and all things existed in a state of eternal perfection, untouched by decay. The Valar each established their own domains on this continent. Yavanna's pastures were green and vibrant with life. Orome's forests were vast and full of the vitality of the hunt. Nienna's halls were on the far western edge of the continent, facing the outer sea, her sorrow turning into the world's healing power. And in Ole's forges, countless exquisite creations were born. The capital of Valinor was Valmar, a city of innumerable gold and silver whisks and sweet-sounding bells. This land became an idealized model, a sacred domain that concentrated all the potential and beauty of Arda. However, the establishment of this blessed land also planted a profound philosophical seed. The very existence of Valinor was a paradox. It was a utopia built to ward off evil, but its perfection and safety were based on the isolation and abandonment of the outside world. This was a defensive good, a contained light. The Valar, as guardians of all of Arda, chose to concentrate their protective power in a private domain surrounded by high walls, leaving the vastness of Middle-earth to a long darkness and the shadow of Melkor. This choice was not without dissent among the Valar. One of the Valar, Ulmo, the king of the sea, was displeased by the raising of the Pelori Mountains. He deeply loved the mountains and rivers of Middle-earth. His power flowed through all the waters of the world, and he believed that enclosing Valinor went against the original intention of the one god. Ilúvatar. In a later account, Ulmo's view was quoted as such, although this passage may not be directly from the main text of the Silmarillion. Ulmo was not in agreement with this, for he felt it was against the will of Ilúvatar. for the children of Ilúvatar would be born into darkness and would live there. And you are closing the door on them. This statement accurately points to the core dilemma of Valinor's establishment. The Valar created a perfect sanctuary, a private domain of light and joy, to counter Melkor's fortress and dungeon of darkness and dominion. But this in itself was a form of possessiveness that rivaled Melkor's own. This isolation, undertaken to protect purity, ultimately led to a deep alienation and misunderstanding between the Valar and the later awakened children of Ilúvatar. They lived in two vastly different realities. One, a perfect paradise under eternal radiance. The other, a dark wilderness with sparse starlight and ever-present danger. This experiential gap meant that the Valar, despite their good intentions, could never truly understand the fears and struggles of the people they intended to protect. The establishment of Valinor was both one of the Valar's greatest achievements and the beginning of their future tragedies. It is a grand allegory about the eternal choice between safety and responsibility, purity and engagement. When the cities and halls of Valinor were completed, and the Pelori Mountains embraced the blessed land like strong arms, a central problem faced the Valar: light. The two great lamps of the old world were extinguished, and their destruction not only plunged Middle-earth into darkness, but also deprived Valinor of a stable source of light. Although Valinor was surpassingly beautiful in itself, without light, this beauty was like a sleeping treasure, unable to fully display its splendor. The Valar longed for a new, eternal, and pure light to illuminate their new home and, from this center, to re-establish the order and rhythm of the world. Thus, the Valar gathered in their council ring, the Mahanaxar, or Ring of Doom, near the golden gates of Valmar. After careful deliberation, they turned their gaze to Yavanna Kementari, the Queen of the Earth. Yavanna was the giver of all growth and bounty, and her heart held the music of all plants and life. She led the Valar to a green mound outside the western gate of Valmar. This mound was called Selohar, or Corollaire in the Elven tongue. It was not tall, but it was filled with a tranquil and sacred atmosphere. Yavanna ascended the mound and sat down upon the green grass. At that moment, all of Valinor fell silent. All the Valar gathered at the Mahanaxar, sitting silently on their thrones, watching with bated breath. Yavanna began her song. It was not an ordinary song that mortal ears could hear, but a powerful song of creation. She poured all her thoughts about growing things, from the tiniest moss to the most towering trees, from the blossoming of flowers to the ripening of fruits. All her profound knowledge of life's forms and energy flows, and her endless love, into this grand symphony. As Yavanna's song echoed through Valinor, another Vala, Nienna, the Lady of Pity and Mourning, quietly came to Azelohar. She did not sing but stood silently, watering the green mound with her tears, which held all the compassion and healing power of the world. Her tears were not a symbol of despair, but a profound empathy and a purifying force, capable of washing away wounds and nourishing new life. In the Silmarillion, this sacred moment is recorded as follows: "And the Valar sat in silence upon their thrones of council in the Mahanaxar. And they watched. And as they watched, upon the mound there came forth two slender shoots, and silence was over all the world in that hour. Nor was there any other sound, save the chanting of Yavanna. Under her song the saplings grew and became fair and tall, and came to flower. And thus there awoke in the world the Two Trees of Valinor. From Yavanna's song and Nienna's tears, two slender saplings broke through the earth. They grew at a visible rate, their branches spreading and their canopies filling out, eventually becoming two magnificent great trees. They were the Two Trees of Valinor, the most renowned of all Yavanna's creations, and the heart of all tales of the elder days. The first tree, and the elder of the two, was named Telperion. Its leaves were dark green on one side and glittered like polished silver on the other. Its bark was smooth and white, and its branches were adorned with countless flowers, each like a miniature silver lamp, continuously dripping dewdrops of crystalline, silvery light. These dewdrops were collected by Varda in great vats, and it was with this light dew that she later kindled the stars in the sky. The light of Telperion was soft and cool, like moonlight, but purer and brighter. Its name in Quenya means silver, and it had many other names, such as Ninquelote, white blossom, and Silpion. The second tree was named Laurelin, meaning song of gold. Its leaves were the tender green of early spring, edged with glittering gold. Its flowers, like yellow flames, hung in clusters shaped like luminous horns, from which a golden rain of light fell, warming the land below. The radiance of Laurelin was brilliant and warm, full of the heat and joy of life. It was also called Cuiviénen, golden red, and Malinalda, tree of gold. The beauty of these two trees is described in the book as follows. The one had leaves of dark green that beneath were a shining silver. And from each of his countless flowers, a dew of silver light was ever falling. And the earth beneath was dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new opened beech. And their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground. And from the blossoms of that tree, there came forth warmth and a great light. Telperion the one was called in Valinor, and the other was Laurelin. The appearance of the two trees not only brought light to Valinor, but, more importantly, established a new order of time. The life of these two trees followed a precise and harmonious rhythm. Each tree would give light for 7 hours, from its first glimmer to full radiance, and then slowly fade. When the light of one tree completely vanished, the other would begin to awaken and enter its glowing cycle. Twice each day, at dawn and dusk, there was an hour of gloaming when the light of one tree was fading while the other's was rising. In this hour, the silver light of Telperion and the golden light of Laurelin would mingle, creating an ineffably soft and tranquil radiance. Thus, a day in Valinor consisted of 12 hours, 7 hours of silver light, 7 hours of golden light, and 2 one-hour periods of mingling light. This stable and continuous cycle allowed the Valar to begin calculating time precisely. With this, the years of the trees began, and the days of bliss of Valinor commenced. The philosophical meaning of this myth of the two trees' creation is extremely profound. It explores how the highest forms of beauty and life are born in a world that already contains flaws and sorrows. The two trees were not miracles that appeared out of thin air, nor were they some mechanical or magical creations. Their birth was an organic process that required two distinctly different divine powers: the song of Yavanna and the tears of Nienna. Yavanna's song represents vitality, creative will, growth, and joy. This is the positive, outward, formative force of the universe. However, song alone was not enough. In a marred Arda that had experienced the destruction of the great lamps and the rampage of Melkor, pure joy and creativity were themselves fragile. It required the addition of another element, the tears of Nienna. Nienna's tears represent pity, compassion, the acknowledgement of trauma, and the healing achieved through mourning. It is not a negative sorrow, but a deep empathy, a power that chooses to nourish and heal, even after understanding the world's imperfection. Therefore, the light of the two trees, considered the purest and most sacred light in the world of Arda, is complex in its essence. It was conceived from both the joy of creation and compassion for suffering. This reveals a profound truth. In a non-ideal world, the most sublime and enduring beauty is necessarily one that can understand and encompass sorrow. A happiness that ignores suffering and exists only in a sterile environment is often shallow and fragile. It is the radiance that emerges after experiencing, witnessing, and ultimately healing from trauma that possesses a truly soul-stirring power. This perfectly mirrors artistic creation and spiritual growth in the human world. Whether in music, literature, or painting, the works that endure for ages and touch the soul are often not those that simply praise light and happiness, but those that dare to confront the complexity, struggles, and pain of the human condition and distill hope and beauty from them. The Birth of the Two Trees is Tolkien's poetic expression of this artistic and psychological truth, told in the language of myth. Furthermore, Yavanna later said, after the destruction of the two trees, that she could never create their like again. For some works, even for the most powerful of the Valar, can only be done once. This introduces the concept of kairos, or opportune moment, that certain creations are the unique product of a specific time, specific conditions, and a specific state of mind, and cannot be replicated. Its value lies precisely in its uniqueness. This theme would reappear in a more intense and tragic way in the story of Feanor and the Silmarils he created. The birth and destruction of the two trees thus became the starting point for understanding all the core conflicts of the First Age. While Valinor bathed in the alternating splendor of the two trees, enjoying the blessed, timeless bliss, the vast continent of Middle-earth was a completely different scene. There was no light from the two trees, only a deep, seemingly solidified darkness, with the only solace in the sky being the cold, distant stars that Varda had just rekindled. It was on such a silent and gloomy land that a moment destined to change the fate of Varda arrived. In the year 1050 of the Years of the Trees, according to later calculations, by the shores of a great lake surrounded by mountains in the east of Middle-earth, far from Valinor, the firstborn children of Ilúvatar, the Elves, awoke. They awoke from the slumbers set for them by Ilúvatar and opened their eyes. The place where they awoke was named Cuiviénen, the Water of Awakening. This event marked the official beginning of the history of the children of Ilúvatar, and with it, the First Age. When they awoke, the world was silent. The first sight they saw was not the figures of the Valar, nor any form of creation, but the newly kindled stars of Varda reflected on the surface of Lake Cuiviénen. At that moment, starlight became the first light by which they knew the world and the initial definition of eternal beauty in their hearts. The Silmarillion describes their awakening as such. By the starlit mere of Cuiviénen, Water of Awakening, they rose from the sleep of Ilúvatar. And while they dwelt yet silent by Cuiviénen, the stars of heaven were the first objects that they saw. Therefore they have ever loved the starlight, and have revered Varda Elentari above all the Valar. It is because of this first and only grace that the elves hold an unparalleled love and reverence for Varda. They called her Elentari, meaning Queen of the Stars. In their eyes, it was Varda who had lit a beacon of hope for them in the boundless darkness. This love, originating from the dawn of their race, was deeply imprinted on their souls, becoming a core part of their culture and identity. Unfortunately, however, the first to discover the existence of these newborn children was not a benevolent messenger from Valinor, but Melkor, lurking in the darkness. His omnipresent, malevolent perception detected the signs of life by Lake Cuiviénen earlier than the Valar did. He sent his shadows and evil servants to spy and roam among the hills and dense forests around Cuiviénen. Soon, tragedy struck. Some elves, perhaps out of curiosity or having accidentally strayed, would mysteriously disappear when they were alone or in small groups far from the main company, never to return. The elves were filled with fear, not knowing what had befallen their lost kin, only that there was a terrible being, a hunter, preying on them in the dark. Regarding this dark memory, the wise of later ages had a definite conclusion. But the wise have said that Melkor, ever watchful, was first aware of the awakening of the Quendi, and he sent shadows and evil spirits to spy upon them and waylay them. So it came to pass that some of the elves, if they strayed far from their kin, alone or in small groups, would often vanish and never return. And the Quendi said that the hunter had caught them, and they were filled with fear. These elves captured by Melkor suffered a fate far more tragic than death. They were taken to Melkor's great subterranean fortress of Utumno. There Melkor subjected them to long and cruel tortures. He used all his evil arts to twist their bodies, break their minds, and corrupt their souls with lies and pain. Ultimately, from these utterly ruined elves, Melkor bred a new and abominable race of creatures. They were filled with hatred for light and freedom, and held a slavish fear of their creator. This was the origin of the first orcs. Regarding this foulest of Melkor's deeds, it is recorded, "But of those unhappy ones who were ensnared by Melkor little is known of a certainty. For who of the living has descended into the pits of Utumno? Yet this is held true by the wise of Eresia, that all those of the Quendi who came into the hands of Melkor ere Utumno was broken were put there in prison, and by slow arts of cruelty were corrupted and enslaved. And thus did Melkor breed the hideous race of the orcs in envy and mockery of the elves, of whom they were afterwards the bitterest foes." This series of experiences at the dawn of their race, awakening under starlight and their first contact with pure evil, fundamentally shaped the destiny and collective psychology of the elves. It created a deep, almost insurmountable cognitive gulf between the elves and the Valar. The root of this gulf lies in their vastly different first experiences. The experience of the Valar in Aman was one of self-created, controllable, perfect bliss bathed in the eternal light of the two trees. Their perception of evil was as an other that needed to be kept out. The first experience of the elves, however, was one of profound duality. On one side, the distant and holy beauty of Varda's stars, and on the other, the immediate predatory darkness of Melkor. Their world was filled with uncertainty, fear, and trauma. This fundamental difference explains many of the later misunderstandings and conflicts between the Valar and the Elves. The Valar's decision to wage war and summon the Elves to Valinor was motivated by kindness. They hoped to save the Elves from Melkor's darkness. But on a deeper level, it was also an attempt to make the Elves' experience consistent with their own. They hoped to use the absolute, unchanging light of Valinor to cover and heal the unique perspective the Elves had formed in starlight and shadow. However, they did not fully understand that the Elves' love for starlight and their primal fear of darkness had already become an inseparable part of their identity. The Elves' first direct interaction with the Ainur was not with the benevolence of the Valar, but with the malevolence of Melkor. This implanted a deep trauma at the dawn of their race. Therefore, when the Valar finally appeared before them and offered protection in a condescending manner, the Elves' response was bound to be complex and divided. Some Elves would desire this protection, while others, due to inherent distrust and fear of unknown lands, would choose to refuse. This experiential gulf is key to understanding the entire history of the First Age. It explains why, even in Valinor, the Noldor felt a complex mix of unease and pride. It explains why Feanor's inflammatory words could so easily ignite their desire for freedom and autonomy. And it explains why the Sindar who remained in Middle-earth were wary and suspicious of the Noldor who later returned. The root of it all began at that dawn by Lake Cuiviénen, a dawn interwoven with starlight and shadow. When Orome, the Vala and great hunter, during a journey across Middle-earth, chanced to hear the sound of singing by Lake Cuiviénen, he finally discovered the existence of Ilúvatar's firstborn children. He was amazed by their beauty and purity, but also deeply concerned for the peril they were in. He saw the shadow of Melkor lingering around them and learned of the terrifying tales of the disappeared elves. Orome immediately returned to Valinor and brought this news to the other Valar. Upon learning of the elves' plight, the Valar were greatly shaken. Manwë, after seeking guidance from Ilúvatar atop Taniqatil, resolved that Middle-earth could no longer be left to Melkor's dominion. Thus, the Valar launched a great war, known to later ages as the War for the Sake of the Elves. The great host of Valinor, composed of the Valar and their servants, the Maiar, crossed the great sea of Beligayr and attacked Melkor's great fortress of Utumno in the far north. The scale of this war was unprecedented, its power sufficient to reshape the form of continents. The earth groaned and cracked under the clash of divine powers, the seas rose in monstrous waves, and the sky was covered with fire and thick smoke. The elves at Cuiviénen felt the trembling of the earth and saw the light of fires in the north from afar. But the Valar had set a guard around them, shielding them from the direct ravages of the war. After a long and arduous siege, the gates of Utumno were finally broken. Tulkas, the most valiant of the Valar, wrestled Melkor to the ground and bound him fast with the specially forged chain Angainor, made by Ola the Smith. Melkor was taken back to Valinor and imprisoned in the halls of Mandos, sentenced to 3 ages of confinement. After the war, the Valar faced a momentous decision: what to do with the newly rescued elves. They ultimately decided to summon all elves to leave the perilous lands of Middle-earth and come to Aman, to live with them under the eternal light of Valinor. Orome returned once more to the elves and extended this sacred invitation. However, this well-intentioned invitation led to the first and most fundamental schism in the history of the elves, known as the Great Journey. The Silmarillion records this crucial turning point. Then the Cuiviénen were summoned to Valinor, but in the hearts of the elves a great fire was kindled by the words of Orome, and the greater part of the host were moved by his words. Yet there were some that refused the summons, and they were the Avari, the unwilling. This summons divided the elves into two main groups. Eldar. This word in Quenya means people of the stars. The name Orome originally gave to all elves. Later, however, it came to refer specifically to those elves who answered the Valar's summons and embarked on the westward journey. Avari, meaning the unwilling or the refusers. These elves, out of distrust for the Valar, fear of the long journey, or love for their homeland, refused the summons and chose to remain in the east of Middle-earth. They thereafter followed a completely different path from their westward faring kin, and their history has been mostly lost to legend. However, the divisions did not end there. Among the Eldar who embarked on the journey, further differentiations occurred due to the long and arduous path. They were primarily divided into three clans. Vanir. They were the first of all elves to set out and the most eager for the light of Valinor. They were the smallest group, led by Ingwe, and followed Orome without hesitation, eventually all arriving in Aman. They were known as the Fair Elves for their beautiful golden hair and their devotion to the Valar. Noldor. The clan of the Deep Elves, led by Finwë. They loved knowledge and craftsmanship and were filled with a longing for the legends of Valinor. They followed closely behind the Vanir, and most of them also reached Aman. Teleri. They were the largest and most hesitant clan, led by the two brothers Elwë and Olwë. They loved water and singing, and were thus also called the Singers. Their journey was the longest and most tortuous, resulting in the most offshoots. During the westward journey of the Telperion, another significant division occurred, forming the group known as the Umanyar, meaning those not of Aman, referring to the elves who began the journey but ultimately did not reach Aman. This mainly included Nandor. Upon reaching the great natural barrier of the Misty Mountains, a portion of the Teleri, fearing the high mountains, broke away from the main group and turned south, living along the great river Anduin. They became the Nandor, who loved forests and rivers. And a part of them later entered Beleriand and were known as the Green Elves. Sindar. When the main host of the Teleri finally reached the western lands of Middle-earth, the region of Beleriand, their king Elwë, later known as Thingol, was enchanted by the singing of the Maya Melian during a walk in the woods and fell into a long magical slumber, disappearing from sight. His people, unwilling to abandon their king, remained in Beleriand and did not cross the sea to Aman. They later became known as the Sindar, or Grey Elves, and under the rule of Thingol and Melian, they established the great kingdom of Doriath. In the end, only the Vanyar, the Noldor, and a portion of the Teleri, led by Olwë, completed the entire great journey, reached Aman, and witnessed the light of the two trees with their own eyes. These elves who successfully arrived were given a noble title, the Calaquendi, meaning elves of the light. All other elves, including the Avari who remained in the east, and the Umanyar who fell away during the journey, such as the Sindar and the Nandor, were collectively called the Moriquendi, meaning elves of the darkness. Regarding this fundamental division, it is described as such: those that came in the host of the Valar to the uttermost west, and beheld the light of the two trees were called the Calaquendi, Elves of the Light. But the other elves were called the Moriquendi, Elves of the Darkness, for they never beheld the light that was before the sun and moon. The significance of this series of divisions went far beyond geographical migration. It carved the deepest political and cultural rift in the history of the elves, and established an invisible hierarchy based on proximity to the divine, i.e., the light of Valinor. This system was not based on good and evil, but it inevitably gave rise to complex emotions and power dynamics. The Calaquendi, especially the Noldor, saw their knowledge, skills, and power greatly increase under the light of Valinor, creating a substantial difference between them and their kin who remained in Middle-earth. This difference bred a subtle pride in the hearts of the Calaquendi. They believed they had seen the true light and possessed higher wisdom. Later, Feanor would exploit this collective sense of superiority in his speech, declaring that the Noldor deserved their own kingdoms rather than living under the protection of the Valar. Conversely, the Moriquendi, particularly the Sindar of Beleriand, developed complex feelings. On one hand, they were proud of their own lands and culture. On the other, they yearned for the distant, holy light and harbored a sense of abandonment and potential resentment towards their blessed kin. King Thingol of the Sindar, upon the return of the Noldor to Middle-earth, showed clear suspicion and hostility, viewing them as arrogant outsiders intruding upon his domain. Therefore, the Great Journey was not merely a migration of population. It was a culturally and politically formative event. It shaped the unique elven cultures we later know as the Vanir, Noldor, and Sindar, but it also sowed the seeds of their countless future conflicts. The terms light elves and dark elves, though originally intended only to describe whether one had seen the light of the two trees, invisibly established a value judgment. This hierarchy based on light would linger like a ghost, long plaguing the interactions between the elven peoples and becoming a deep-seated cause of the many tragedies of the First Age. If the Great Journey laid the groundwork for the macro conflicts between the elven peoples, then the tragedy of the Noldor themselves stemmed from a more microscopic yet more profound core: the family dynamics within their royal house. At the center of this family tragedy was Finwë, the first High King of the Noldor in Valinor. His family history, like a classic Greek tragedy, was filled with love, loss, jealousy, and fate, and ultimately provided the perfect opening for Melkor's evil schemes. Finwë led his people, the Noldor, filled with a thirst for knowledge and skill, to Valinor. In the Calachiria, the pass in the Pelori Mountains, upon the hill of Tuna, they built the beautiful city of Tirion. There, Finwë married his first wife, Miriel Serinde. Miriel was a woman of consummate skill, especially in embroidery, with craftsmanship so exquisite that even the Valar marveled at it. Their love was great and joyous, for it was born in the bliss of the blessed realm of Valinor. Soon, Miriel bore Finwë a son. This child inherited all the virtues of both parents and surpassed them. He had his father's courage and determination, and his mother's exquisite skill and resilient spirit. He was given the name Curu Finwë, but his mother called him Feanor, meaning spirit of fire. The birth of Feanor was the pinnacle of the Noldor's glory, but it also consumed all of his mother's life force. In the life essence of the elves, childbirth is an extremely taxing affair for both mind and body. For Miriel, giving birth to Feanor, a being so gifted and with a spirit that burned like a blazing fire, nearly emptied her of body and soul. After giving birth to Feanor, she felt an unprecedented weariness and lost all passion and desire for life. The Silmarillion records the sorrowful words she spoke to Finwë. "Never again shall I bear child, for strength that would have nourished the life of many has gone forth into Feanor." And when Finwë was grieved by this, she said again, "Be not grieved, for Feanor shall be renowned in Arda." She felt utterly weary in body and spirit, and longed for rest. Thus, she made a decision unheard of among the elves. She chose to voluntarily give up her life. She went to rest in the gardens of Lorien, of Valar, and her spirit departed from her body, entering the halls of Mandos, and she refused the chance of rebirth. For the immortal elves, this was tantamount to death. Miriel's passing brought immense grief to Finwë and laid the groundwork for the original sin of the House of Finwë. Finwë loved Miriel dearly, but also longed for more children, as the Noldor were not yet numerous. After a long period of loneliness and sorrow, he made another decision unprecedented among the elves. He wished to remarry. This request sparked a serious debate among the Valar, for the union of elves was for life, until death. But considering that Miriel had departed voluntarily and would never return, and that Finwë's sorrow needed solace, the Valar eventually delivered a judgment, the Statute of Finwë and Miriel, permitting Finwë's remarriage. Thus, Finwë took a second wife, Indis of the Vanyar. Indis was beautiful and noble, and had long admired Finwë. This marriage brought Finwë 2 new sons, Fingolfin and Finarfin. At this point, the unhealable rift within the Noldoran royal house was officially formed. Finwë now had 3 princes of vastly different characters and intertwined fates. Feanor, son of Miriel. He was the most skilled, most powerful-minded, and most fiery-willed of all the elves. But he was also the proudest, most stubborn, and least willing to share. Fingolfin, the elder son of Indis. He was considered the strongest, most steadfast, and most valiant warrior of the 3 brothers. Finarfin, the second son of Indis. He inherited his mother's Vanyuran golden hair and beauty, and was the fairest, wisest in heart, and most peaceful of the 3 brothers. The relationship between these 3 princes was fraught with tension and rivalry from the very beginning. Feanor, growing up without a mother, saw his stepmother Indis and her 2 sons as intruders who had stolen the paternal love he believed should have been his alone. He held a particular enmity for Fingolfin, who was equally powerful and proud and often opposed him in word and deed. Regarding this family rift, the book comments, "The sons of Indis, Fingolfin and Finarfin, were also great and glorious, but the dissension of the Noldor had its roots in the discord between the sons of Finwë." The philosophical meaning of this family tragedy lies in revealing the profound reality that the personal is political. The later rebellion, division, and ultimate doom of the Noldor did not begin with Melkor's evil itself, but with a deep personal emotional crisis within the royal house. The life and marriage patterns of the elves were meant to be eternal and stable. They wed only once for life, and death was not an end for them. Miriel's choice of death after childbirth was in itself an unnatural event that broke the inherent order of Arda. It represented a profound exhaustion and despair, the first shadow to fall upon the blessed realm. And Finwë's remarriage, though permitted by the Valar, was considered by the wise of later ages to be the root of all future misfortune. For it created a broken family dynamic that was unprecedented for the Elves. Feanor's character was shaped in this abnormal family environment. He experienced a unique sense of loss from a young age, which cultivated in him a strong pathological possessiveness. He longed to exclusively possess what was his, the memory of his mother, and the irreplaceable first love of his father Finwë. When he grew up, this intense possessiveness was naturally transferred to his greatest creations, the 3 Silmarils that contained the light of the 2 trees. The jewels became the repository for all his emotions, the ultimate embodiment of his personal worth and exclusive desire. Melkor, after being released and returning to Valinor, keenly perceived this rift hidden deep within the heart of the Noldorin royal house. He did not create conflict in the house of Finwë. He simply discovered it and, with his venomous lies, pried it wide open. He whispered to Feanor that his half-brothers were plotting to usurp his inheritance and seize the Silmarils. He then hinted to Fingolfin and Finarfin that Feanor was arrogant and intended to push them out of the center of power among the Noldor. These lies were effective precisely because they catered to the suspicion and resentment that already existed in the brothers' hearts. Therefore, the key to understanding the tragedy of the Noldor lies not in condemning Melkor's evil, but in seeing that even a perfect utopia like Valinor is not immune to the profound impact of personal emotions, family relationships, and psychological trauma. Behind grand historical narratives often lie unspeakable personal pains. The internal strife of the House of Finwë was the first domino to fall, and its collapse ultimately triggered an avalanche that would sweep across Middle-earth for an entire age. Now, the night is deep, and perhaps you are feeling a bit sleepy. Let our thoughts, following the rhythm of the story, slowly settle down. Imagine that distant land, guarded by the Pelori Mountains, Valinor. The light there comes not from a burning star, but from 2 great trees that breathe and sing. One flows with a silver radiance like moonlight. The other scatters a golden rain like the sun. Time there is not a rushing, straight line, but a gentle, undulating, eternal cycle composed of alternating light. Then, cast your thoughts to that vast Middle-earth, slumbering under the starlight. By the shores of Cuiviénen, the first pair of elven eyes opened, and what they saw were the stars Varda had lit for them, scattered like diamonds across the velvet night sky. That initial, pure wonder and love is the underlying color of their souls. But soon, a shadow fell, and fear planted its first seed in their hearts. And so, the world was split in 2. On one side were the Light Elves, bathed in holy radiance, learning the wisdom of the Valar, their skills growing daily, and a seed of pride quietly growing in their hearts. On the other side were the Dark Elves, who remained under starlight and shadow, putting down roots in the earth, living with the mountains and rivers, and carrying a sense of forgotten loneliness and resilience in their hearts. And at the heart of this light and pride, in the royal house of the Noldor, a family tragedy was quietly unfolding. The death of a mother, the remarriage of a father, the unbridgeable rift between 3 brothers. These seemingly private emotional entanglements were like an invisible fuse connected to all the future wars, betrayals, and destructions. These ancient legends are like the distant stars in the night sky. Their light has traveled through vast stretches of time to reach us. Their stories intertwine light and darkness, creation and destruction, love and jealousy. Now, let these images, these sounds, these ancient emotions flow gently in your dreams. Let them become the backdrop of your sleep, a gentle and vast starry sky woven from myth. Good night.